my friends, and I'd like to extend to you a very warm welcome back to my painting channel. And on this video we are going to be painting a special model, and we're going to be painting King Thedoen. This is from the Games Workshop model range from the Middle-earth strategy battle game. And this is quite a highly detailed model, so this is going to be a little bit of a lengthy video, but I'm going to break this down into chapters for you so you can follow as easy as you like. So you can just follow on the bits that you need to know and the bits that you'd like, and not have to watch through the entire thing. So we're going to start as always with the skin. Now I'm going to start with the beige red, so we're going to go with my tried and tested setup first. So I'm going to base this using this beige red colour. This is a really good sort of pinky red sort of base colour for the skin, and this is really going to be a good colour that we can build up from later. I'm also going to use a Vallejo khaki colour. Now this I'm just going to use across the hair, and again this is a good base colour because we can build the brightness, the vibrance and the highlights later. So we're going to start off with that beige red for the skin, and then the Vallejo khaki for the hair. Now the thing to remember with the hair is to also make sure to paint around the little beard that he's got just around his mouth here. And again, with the early stages, you don't have to be too careful because this is something that you can easily adjust and configure and fix if you make any mistakes anyway. But I like to be quite careful when I'm applying my base coats and my starting coats, because this does make the work a little bit later just that little bit easier. It's something that we don't need to spend too much time fixing and repairing later, so it's better to get it right from the start. I'm going to paint a burnt red colour just on the small bits of cloth that Thedoen has. So this is just going to be just underneath the arm ranges here. Now Thedoen is covered in a lot of brown leather armour. There's going to be a lot of brown on this model, but we're going to mix these browns together and we're going to get different sorts of colours. But just around the armour he does also have a very small amount of red, but we don't want the red to be too vibrant, so we're using a burnt red as a dark base colour, and we're going to build that up from there. But we're only going to go so far because we don't want this to stand out and be too lavish and too bright. And once that's dry, I'm going to use a gunmetal colour. So this is a nice dark silver colour. So this is a really good base silver that we can always highlight later and bring up later should we want. And pretty much I'm just going to paint all of the chainmail with this colour. I'm also going to paint the sword blade, but not the hilt. The hilt we're going to paint a different colour later. But I'm also going to paint all of the chainmail on the horse using the same colour. So again, this is just the base colour for those silver parts. There are a few other bits of details that we can paint silver as well, but we can always pick those out later, so we don't need to worry too much about them just yet. One or two of those are just around the area on the belt where the sword sheath is held, and one or two just around the horse's helm as well. So there's the two little visor points sticking out around the horse's eyes. I'm also going to paint those in this silver as well, and just one or two bits on the reins just around the mouth. But like I say, you don't have to follow and do exactly the same. You can sort of stick to a few different bits using this gold instead if you like. So what we're going to do with the armour, now the armour is quite interesting, so I'm going to use this Retributor armour colour, and pretty much what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint the armour using this Retributor armour. Now what makes the armour very interesting with Thedoen is the armour is actually quite two-toned. So what we've got is we've got this golden sort of colour, but we've also got this reddy brown colour as well of the armour. Now what makes this difficult is the reddy brown colour is sort of on top, whereas this gold sort of colour is sort of shining through. So what we're going to do is we're going to base all of the armour using this Retributor armour, this nice sort of gold colour. And as we build the armour up around his body, we're then also going to build up the browns on those raised patches and panels on the armour. And this is really going to separate the armour. This is going to allow the armour to really stand out and really sort of look like there's a lot of separated colour there. We're also going to cheat a little bit and use a wash to kind of get some of the browns and things into these detailed areas where we can't kind of get the brush to get in there and do it perfectly. So we're just going to cheat a little bit, but this is going to be really cool because this is going to give us a really quick and easy way of getting the effect that we're looking for. So as you can see, I'm building all of the shoulder pads, the shoulder panels, just a little bit of the horse's helm as well, so just a little bit across the front by his nose and a little bit across the tips here. I'm also going to paint the sword hilt using this gold, and as you can see there's also this rather large sort of symbol just across the front of the horse's armour as well. I'm going to paint that in this gold, and of course Theoden's greaves as well, we're going to do exactly the same. So yeah, as I say, building this colour up, building this gold up, and just painting these little symbols, and then we're going to allow the wash that we're going to use a little bit later to sort of kind of build a little bit of extra tone and texture and depth to the model. So once all of that gold is dry, we're going to move on and use the Dark Rust 302, which again is another one of my favourite colours, and this is what we are going to base all of those leathers with. So we're going to base practically the entire horse area, so we're going to base coat all of these individual sort of leather pads and leather areas around the horse. We're also going to base the sword sheath, we're going to base the boots, the horse's helm, and we're also going to base all of the armour just around Theoden's body as well. So as you can see, I'm just trying to apply this as safely and as carefully as possible, not to get this onto the silver that we've already used. And again, this is a good example as to why it's always useful to use a thin down paint, because as you can see, with all of the details and all of the textures and things like that on the horse's armour, if the paint wasn't thinned down, you wouldn't get this into the cracks and grooves that we need it to. So by using a nice thin down paint, not only does it move onto the miniature better, and not only does it last longer on your brush, but it also allows that paint to get into some of those recess points that otherwise you might sort of struggle getting the brush into. So this is a great way of showing you how to get or how to use that thin down paint. Now, importantly, as I was saying earlier, we've painted the gold on those armor panels, and now that's all we're going to do. As I said, we're going to pick out those detailed points with this brown, and the reason for this is all of these are sort of small horses head they're small horses heads in terms of the insignia. So we are just going to paint these in this brown color, so this is going to give us this really cool base color. And this is separating those leather panels from the gold armor. And again, when we apply the wash a little bit later, this is also going to create that depth and that real sort of nice dynamic sort of color to that gold as well. So yeah, we're just going to build that up. So just being as careful as possible, using the very tip of the brush, we're just going to build up on all of those panels across the shoulder pads and things like that. Now once we're done from there, we're going to use a Miskatonic Grey from scale 75. So pretty much what I'm doing here is I'm using a very, very light sort of grey colour. Now if you don't have Miskatonic Grey, you could use something like a Sky Grey from Vallejo. That would do pretty much the same job. It's quite a light grey, it's quite a nice vibrant sort of colour, but it doesn't, it's not too dark, it's not too light, and as you can see with this nice thin down paint, this is just moving smoothly and lovely onto the miniature as well. This is a really good sort of base colour because we can always build up from there, and we're going to build up some really cool sort of looking fur textures and things like that a little bit later. So we're just going to try to be as careful as possible, especially around things like the eyes and areas where the leather has been painted already. Now once that's done, so that's the horse's skin colour, we're going to use that grey colour, and then we're also going to use a bone white colour just to pick out the tail and the mane. So again, just being as careful as possible and covering all of this area in this nice sort of creamy sort of white colour. So the reason why we're doing this is going to separate the tail and the mane from the horse. This is going to allow the horse to have a little bit of a different kind of texture and tone. If we painted the whole thing sort of in this white colour, then you wouldn't have that really cool sort of mixed colour tone. You might lose a little bit of the character of the horse. So by just using these multiple sort of tones, but keeping them both nice and bright and vibrant and nice and light colours, it's just adding to that little bit more of a character to the horse, giving you more to look at. With this model, we're going to use a couple of different washes and shades. So I'm going to start using a flesh wash, and the flesh wash is literally just going to be applied only to Theoden's flesh. So we're just going to use this across the face, across the hands, and that is pretty much about it. I'm just going to go quickly around the area where his beard is, just to tie that colour into the face a little bit. And that doesn't matter too much because we can pick that out a little bit later. It might seem like I'm applying this on a little bit too thickly, but that's purely just because I've watered down the shade a little bit just to make it move around the model a bit better. So this isn't directly out of the pot, this has a little bit of water on there, so that's why it looks like I'm applying maybe a little bit too much wash. If I took this straight out of the bottle, I wouldn't apply this in such a thick layer. I would apply this in a much thinner layer, and I would use a much thinner brush to do so as well. But just because we're using a little bit of water, it gives me a little bit more room to manipulate and control where that wash is going to sit. A flesh wash is very similar to Raglan Flesh Shade, so if you're a Games Workshop user, you can use that, and that is absolutely fine. That will work in exactly the same way. Now, once we've used that, we're going to move on to a strong tone, and with the strong tone, we're going to cover all of the leathers, so all of that armor, all of the gold, all of the silver, and all of the brown. So we're just going to cover all of those areas in this strong tone. Now, strong tone is a much darker brown color, so this is quite similar to using, in Games Workshop terms, something like the Agrax Earth Shade. So this is a dark brown shade and a good shade wash to use for things like the leathers. Now, as I said earlier, this is where we're cheating a little bit. You see now with those shoulder panels where that wash is now starting to sit into all of those little recess points. You see how that's creating that dark brown combination between the gold and the brown that we've been using for the leather panels. And that's kind of what I meant by we're cheating a little, because the wash is going to do a little bit of the work for us, which is fantastic. I'm also going to cover the hair using the same colour, and then once all of that is dry, we're going to move on to use a pale grey wash from Vallejo. This is purely an optional stage. This is just kind of me using something a little bit different on the horse. I'm just trying to tie some of those colours between that cream and the grey together. Now, the whole idea with this is this will dry down to a cool matte effect. So especially in the areas around the horse's neck, this will give a nice little bit of a subtle shade around those areas. Now, you could use a black wash for this. You could use something like a null oil, being sort of greys and things like that, but you might darken certain areas down too much, because we kind of want these areas to stay nice and vibrant and fresh. We don't want to use too much of a dark wash, so you're just using that nice sort of light grey wash instead. Now, once all of the shades are dry, we're just going to go back and paint the skin. Now, if you've watched me paint skin, you know how this is going to go. We're just going to use the base colour first, so we're just using that beige red just to pick out all of those details once again, using a very fine tip brush. So for this, I'm using my 5.0 brush, or my 5-0 brush, and this is a nice very fine tip brush, and as you can see, I'm just building those tones back up using the very tip of that fine tip brush as well. And already you can see the effect that that's having on the skin. So that's creating already a really cool sort of vibrant step up. And we're going to slowly build those steps as well. Now, you can kind of see where the shade has sat in the recess points on the skin, especially the hands, sort of in between the fingers and things like that. And what you want to do in this stage is just paint this colour on top of the areas that are bulging. So you don't want to paint where the shade is sitting in between sort of the fingers or around his eyes, giving you the option and giving you complete control on how to sort of build that character and build those details, because it's already kind of mapped out in front of you anyway. Now, again, like I say, if you've seen me paint skin before, you'll know that the next step that I'll take is half of the base colour, which was the beige red, and then we're just going to use a half of the basic skin tone, which is the next highlight up. So we're going to use half and half. That's one blob of each paint, and again, using that very fine detailed brush, we're just going to apply this across some of those raised points, so the cheeks, the cheekbones, just across the forehead, and of course across the nose, and across the hands and fingers again as well. Then we're going to use the basic skin tone on its own, and again doing the exact same thing, being a little bit more specific now about where we place these highlights. And as you can see, I'm just using a very small stippling effect as well, which just means I'm dabbing the very tip of the brush just into areas that I kind of want those highlights to sort of pop. Again, just focusing on the forehead, the nose, and across those cheekbones as well, those raised up cheek areas, just like so. Now, when you apply the paint, it may look a little bit light to begin with, and as it dries down, it will dry down darker, and with a nice thin paint as well, some of the underlying colours below will also show through quite nicely as well, giving you this nice smooth transition. From there, I'm going to call the skin done. Then we're going to move on to the hair, and we're going to use the khaki colour that we used originally again. Once more, using a nice thin paint and that really fine detail brush, you can see now that I'm going to start to pick out all of those individual strands of hair. And what you'll notice when I'm painting like this, I tend to paint like I draw, which is very, very sketchy. So as you can see, my hand is moving quite a lot. So I'm just kind of building the momentum and the motion as to which way I want the paintbrush to move. And then I'm just going to slowly apply very, very, very light layers of that paint in the direction that I'm going. So it's very, very similar to drawing, very similar if you have ever sat down and sketched out things. You know, you sketch things first, you kind of plan the way that your hand is moving, you plan the motions and things like that. If you don't do a lot of drawing and you don't kind of know what I'm saying, pretty much it's just all about practice. The more you practice, the more you paint, the more you draw these sorts of things, the more you kind of get used to your hand moving and sort of getting used to the position that you're going to put the pen, the pencil, or the paint in this case. Now once that khaki layer is dry, we're going to mix half and half. So we're going to mix a little bit of that khaki in with a bone white just to get a nice boost. So again, this is half and half. This is one blob of each just to kind of naturally create a nice highlight to that khaki colour. And as you can see, bone white is already giving this khaki colour a really nice vibrant boost. And this is where we're just going to start to pick out all of those individual hair strands again. Painting like this, as I've said a few times on the channel, you can sit there and dry brush should you want to, and that's absolutely fine. They're your miniatures, you could paint them however you like. I just like to paint hair individually like this because it does show off that you've spent a little bit more time on the model, and it also really does show off on the final piece, because when you place this into your games or be it in your display cabinet, it gives you that really cool sense of pride that you've actually sat down and spent the time to really paint all of these different individual strands and layers, and it really does show through on the model as well. It shows through on the final piece. Now once that's done, I'm just going to use another highlight. This one is Vampiric Flesh, so this one's from the AK Interactive. You could just continue to sort of highlight using the bone white if you don't have Vampiric Flesh. However, Vampiric Flesh from AK Interactive is a fantastic colour. It has a natural highlight and it dries down to a really nice light matte finish. So for things like hair, this is a really good go-to paint. This will naturally highlight that hair in such a lovely way. So yeah, again, just using that very tip of that brush. Just being as careful as possible, as you can see, despite the fact that I've got quite a shaky hand on times. Yeah, it's cool. You can see it already having an effect and already picking out some of those strands. There we go, we're starting to get that highlight coming through in such a lovely way. Now you can see that depth on the hair from the original colour and the shade and the wash, then to the normal highlight, and then this extreme highlight as well. Don't forget as well, when you're highlighting the hair, to also make sure to do the same thing to the beard. Now while I'm doing the beard, because this is a little bit more difficult to get to, I'm just using again those stippling motions, just using the very tip of the brush and just dabbing that there to kind of create that texture and that almost sort of like idea that there are strands of hair in that beard. So from there, once the hair and skin is done, we're going to move on to all of those armoured panels. Now this is the bit that took me probably the longest to do. And pretty much that's all I'm doing is, to start with, I'm using the base colour that we used, which was the dark rust. And then I'm also mixing in a 50% mixture of flat earth. So this is going to be one blob of each, so 50% of each paint. And this is going to give it the most natural and subtle highlight and tone straight on top of the original base colour. And pretty much with this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint this on top of all of the armoured areas that I would like this to build up from. So we're going to go down the route of using this on the scabbard. We're also going to use this on all of the panels of armour on Thedoen himself, so his chest piece, the breastplate, the shoulder pads where we can see those little bits of red leather that we're going to have in the details, so the horses' heads. I'm also going to paint this on the horse's helm as well, and as you can see, I'm spending a lot of time to hand paint all of these individual armor pieces on the horse as well. Again, should you want to, if you feel like you don't have the confidence to do this, you can by all means dry brush it, but be careful. Dry brushing is a difficult one to control on times. Sometimes when you're dry brushing, you kind of get paint on other parts of the miniature, You can also sort of lose some of the details by going a little bit too extreme. So with dry brushing, just be a little bit careful, especially on something like this. Like the hair, as I said earlier, when you're painting something with this amount of detail and you're spending so much time on painting all of those panels on the horse, you will look back on this model and you will see this model in your cabinet and have that sense of pride with how much you've put into the model. And it will also show through in the final piece. You kind of see the amount of love and detail and attention that you've put into all these different panels as well. So painting in this way may take a while and it may be a little bit difficult, but it is very, very, very much worth it in the end, I promise. So once you've done the first highlight, then you're just going to use the flat brown just for the second highlight. I think I made a mistake earlier and suggested flat earth, but I believe it is flat brown that we're using, not flat earth, so apologies there. But we're just going to use the flat brown, as I'm getting a little bit mixed up, just on its own now, just to build. And as you can see now, we're starting to get into this red colour, this sort of red leather tone. That's exactly what we want, because there's so many different leathers and so many different browns on this model. What we're actually doing is we're going to paint the armour on the horse and on Thedoen himself. We're going to paint this up using this red leather sort of colour, and then we're going to use more of an orange tone on some of the other bits like the reins and the leather straps and things like that. And by doing so, this is going to create a different texture and a different colour texture and a different colour palette, which will allow you to drag your eye and draw your eye into the model. It's not all going to look like one flat colour, and again, that's what's going to create this model, the ability to stand out off the table or really look the part in your display cabinet as well. So like I say, this is the red leather that we're going down the route with, so this has got a more reddy tone to it, and we're going to build this up as well a little bit later with another colour, just to get that vibrance and that boost and that sort of reddy kind of tone coming through. Again, as I said, if you're not confident in painting all of these bits individually and you really want to paint the horse using a dry brushing motion, of course you can do, because it is your model. You can paint them however you like. I'm not going to sit here and tell you how to paint. They're your models, you pay for them, you enjoy them, and you enjoy painting however you like. I'm not one to sort of push opinions and things like that. I would much rather just show you how I paint and allow you to paint along with me. The whole idea of this channel is purely just to paint models. I love painting models, and I really hope that that shows through when I'm painting with you guys. And sometimes, if I can, pass on some knowledge and pass on some tips and tricks, then that makes me happy. So yeah, as you can see, just using the very tip of the brush, you can already now see that sort of red tone coming through. You can see that colour sort of vibrant pop coming through on all of these different panels. And again, if you wanted to, by using this thin down paint, you can just paint more across the top sort of area rather than across the whole panel, and then that kind of gives you that really cool sort of natural glow sort of blend from the highlight to the dark then. So it could be lighter across the top, slightly darker across the bottom, and that gives you this sort of natural light glow, which is a cool technique all on its own. As you can see, I'm just painting across the panels as much as I can. From there then, the natural highlight to that would become a mahogany brown. So we're just going to use this mahogany brown, and again I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to start to pick out all of those areas on the horse, and I'm just using a nice thin down paint, as you can see, so this lasts much longer on the brush, giving me the ability to paint for a much longer period of time. You can already again see this highlight starting to progress now and starting to pop on this miniature. It's really starting to look good, especially across the back of the horse and some of those areas where the light might be catching just on those rounded edges just around the back area. And there we go. As you can see, I'm just sort of picking out some of those parts where I want the highlight to be, leaving some of the darker areas just below. As I said earlier, I really love to paint. I like to try different things. I like to try different techniques. I like to push the paint in and develop, and sometimes taking those risks and trying something like, in this case, painting everything individually might seem a little bit too much, might seem a little bit too extreme, might seem like it's too far or too much for a single model. But when it comes off and when it actually works, as I said earlier, it's such a good reward. And it always makes you feel good when you get to the end of the model and you think, yeah, I managed to paint all of that myself, and it's a really good, empowering feeling. So with some of the armour now, because we're talking about leathers, I am using a stippling motion as well, which you would have seen me use, as I said earlier. It's just about dabbing the very tip of the brush just across certain areas, and that kind of gives it the texture of a little bit more worn, or a little bit more sort of textured in that sort of sense, so that it kind of gives the model a little bit more to look at. Sometimes using just flat colours can sort of lose out a little bit on the character, so kind of using a stippling motion for the giving it the illusion of texture adds a little bit more character to the model as well, adds a little bit more depth to the miniature, and a little bit more to the story if the model's been involved in fights and things like that as well. Just doing the same across the helm on the horse as well, as you can see, building up those red colours and those red tones. It's really starting to look the part across all of these sort of reddy colour areas of the armour. It's amazing how just a couple of layers and you can already see how much the sort of model is starting to pop and how much the model is starting to grow. Now for a final layer, this one is purely optional. You don't have to do this. I just felt like I wanted to push it just that little bit further. I'm mixing that mahogany brown with a bone white. And again, this is just a 50-50, so this is just one blob of each. And I've thinned this down nice and smooth so that this will last longer on the brush again. And this time that's all I'm going to try to do is pick out as many of the details as I can. So as you can see, just across the scabbard of the sword, I'm just adding a few scratches and scrapes just across the edge, and the same with the armour. As you can see, I'm just adding a little crisscross here. You don't have to add crisscrosses, you can just put a little random line here or there just to kind of give it the illusion that there's a scrape or a scratch, and again add into that texture and that character that Theoden's been in a fight or two. He knows what he's doing, you know. It just kind of builds up that character as well. And again, I'm just going to try to stick this more towards the area now where I think the light is going to be catching on the armour. So just across the top bits, but not the bottom, as you can see. There we go. And this is now starting to pick out some of that highlight, and it's really going to look the part again on that table when it's down. Just like so. Now you don't have to go all the way to the bottom of the miniature on this one. You could just focus this just across the top area if you wanted to. Again, like I say, this layer is purely and utterly optional. You don't have to do this. This is just something I personally wanted to push a little bit further. Now for the saddle, now we're going to paint this completely different. So we're going to use a leather brown, but this one is from the Army Painter, and this one is more of a muted flat brown kind of colour. So I'm just using this leather brown, and I'm only going to use a stippling motion on this because we want the saddle to look a lot more worn out, because obviously someone's riding in the saddle, they're riding in the saddle all the time. It's giving it more texture, more detail. So we're just using the stippling motion just to create this illusion, as I said, of texture, this creation of depth to the model as well. So yeah, just kind of using the very, very tip of the brush, as I say. As you can see, it's starting to make a texture already. Now, like we did earlier, we're just going to use a little bit of bone white in with this. So again, this is 50-50, and we're going to continue on the same path. So we're going to use that stippling technique to just kind of build up this saddle. Now, I use bone white a lot for browns. Bone white is a great way of highlighting brown. You would automatically think you've got to highlight with whites, but that's not technically true, because bone white is a more creamy texture, it's a more creamy colour. This works really well for those earthy tones of the browns. So when you're using this bone white to highlight brown, you maintain and keep that element of brown, but you kind of just highlight it rather than diluting and creating a whiter colour, and that's a really good thing. So when I'm highlighting brown, I very often tend to use bone white. So going back to that vampiric flesh again, and again I'm just using a very thin down version of this, and I'm just going to pick out as much of the very, very, very edge as I can. And once again, you can also use this to create some scrapes and scratches using the very, very tip of your brush as well. Now with the paint being thin as well, this isn't going to stick out and be too vibrant, which is great, because it doesn't matter if you make a mistake or anything, you can always fix this. But again, just using the very tip of the brush just to create that scrape and scratch. From there, I'm then going to use another leather brown, but this leather brown this time, this one is from AK Interactive. So if you've seen me paint leathers on this channel before, this is now my tried and tested leather colour. So we're going to use this leather brown colour, and again using some scraping and stippling motions, we're just going to paint this across the reins, and of course we're going to do this across Theoden's belt as well. And again, because this now is going to go into more of an orangey tone and into more of an orangey leather colour, this is really going to stand out from that belt to the red browns that we've been using for the armour, and it's really going to make it pop. So we're going to do half of the leather brown with half of the deep brown, and this is just 50% of each, so 50-50, and again using that scratching and dabbing motion, that stippling kind of effect that we're using. We're just going to paint around some of these leathers here. Sometimes you'll see me using the brush and just scraping this across and trying to get some textures through, but it doesn't matter too much if we've got some of the underlying colours, because that's adding to the depth as well. And again, as you can see, just going across the reins and just going to do this across the belt as well. Now at this stage in this layer, this isn't going to pop off the armour just yet, but as we build this up, this in turn will start to pop, and it will separate those reins and that belt from the armour as well, which is exactly what we want it to do. As you can see, just highlighting around the edge of those reins. So you're going to use the deep brown on its own then for the next natural highlight to this. And as you can see, I'm going to be a little bit more specific as to where I place this. So I'm going to run this just across the edge of the reins. And again, just adding some scrapes and scratches from across the top area. I'm just going to try to create an illusion where the light is kind of catching on certain areas of the leathers with this. So again, trying to be a bit more controlled where this goes, adding this just to the very edges and things like that. Again, it doesn't matter if you leave in some of the colours underneath, because that's what's kind of adding to the texture and the tone. That's what's adding to the illusion that there's more to it than just one flat colour, which is great for leathers, because leathers obviously you want them to be battered, worn, a little bit scratched, a little bit scraped. Leather itself isn't a flat sort of lovely tone. It kind of has a few sort of textures to it as well. So that stippling motion is perfect for that. So as you can see, I'm just doing that across the belt, just across the area where his feet are in the stirrups, and just around the reins, again, just on this side. You can already now start to see where that orange is popping off the sort of red browns that we use for the armour. So we're going to go back and paint the reds now just on the shirt. So we're going to start with the base colour that we used, which was the burnt red. We're just going to add this in. This is a really cool, quick, easy, nice little way of doing this. So we're just going to follow the folds like normal, using the wash in all of those recess points, and just going to follow those folds as much as we can. Nice and simple, leaving the shade to do the work, leaving the shade in those deeper areas so that it creates and adds to the depth. From there, we're going to use just red from Vallejo. It's literally just called red. It doesn't have any other second or special or extreme name. It's just called red. So from there, we're just going to use red, and we're going to build up in exactly the same way, just painting on those folds and on those raised creases and on all of those raised areas. And again, this is going to allow that red to slightly pop and slightly sort of boost, but you're kind of getting this burgundy red out of this. So if you followed my latest video about Haldir, we were using much brighter reds to kind of get this elfic red and this elven colour to really pop, whereas this time we're using these reds in a little bit more of a toned down way to kind of create a more sort of crimson red rather than a bright red. And the final stage to this then is just using that carmine red and doing the same, just picking out all of those folds just like so. As you can see now, that's all blending quite nicely in. Now we're going to go back to the army painter, and we're going to use a plate mail metal. Now plate mail metal is a great vibrant silver, and what I'm going to do, I'm just going to gently dry brush just across the raised areas where the chainmail is. Now I say gently because I don't want to get this on any of the hard work that I've already done. So you could do this first if you wanted to, if you're less confident on your dry brushing, but for me, I'm just going to do this as one of the last stages of this sort of area. And once I've done the dry brushing, I'm also then just going to switch back over to my paintbrush, and as I said earlier, I'm just going to pick out some of those last little bits of metallics holding the sword's hilt onto the belt just up here. So this is what I mentioned much earlier in the video. I'm also then just going to run an edge highlight of this just across those blinders, those blinkers around the horse's helm, and I'm also just going to do a dabbing, stippling motion just across the stirrups themselves as well. Now the natural highlight to plate mail metal is shining silver, again from the Army painter. This is a fantastic colour. This has a really gorgeous highlight. It really does have a lovely sort of pop to it. It really does glow. It's a good metallic colour, and it's a great one for highlighting on top of those silvers that we've already used. This will really make those silvers stand out. And again, as I say, just trying to be as very careful as possible, using my smallest dry brush that I can, just to dry brush over those areas without getting the silver onto the horse's armour and things like that. Just like so. You can also dry brush the sword's blade as well at the same time if you like. So yeah, just build in the sword's highlights up there as well. And again, just across those little metallic hinges and things holding the sword in place. And of course, just around the stirrups as well. Just being a little bit more edge highlighting, so just sticking more towards the edge. Now moving on to the horse, we're gonna paint this using the Miskatonic grey, but we're also going to add a small sort of a half and half layer of silver grey from the AK Interactive. And what I'm doing with this is using the very tip of that brush once again, using that really fine 5.0 brush once again. As you can see, this time I'm kind of mixing my techniques together. So instead of using straight running long brush strokes, as you can see here, I'm using much shorter, much quicker brush strokes. And this is kind of like that, almost like the dabbing motion. But what I'm doing is I'm just dragging my brush very gently, very quickly, in small scraping motions. And why I'm doing this is because we're going to create the element and the illusion of fur on the horse, so the horse has hair. We don't want it to be a flat color, so we're just using this very quick, light scraping technique. As you can see, I'm just scraping the very tip of the brush, and this is creating that illusion of hair, that illusion that there's fur on the horse. And as we build this up in multiple layers, so just using the silver grey on its own now, we're going to do the exact same thing. But as we're building this up in layers, some of the layers underneath are going to show through, and that's going to create that texture, that depth to the fur, that illusion, as I say, that the horse has hair. And as you can see, it's already starting to show. We're starting to build that hairy, sort of furry kind of effect just by doing a very quick, simple scraping effect, just like so. And again, just using the very tip of the brush as much as we can. And we're going to paint that just down the neck, around the face, just down on the areas of the legs. Now, as you can see, when I mentioned earlier about that really light grey wash, we're going to leave that in the recessed area. So in the area where you can see the darker patch just on the legs, we're going to leave the wash in there. We're not going to paint the fur in there. We're going to paint the fur where we think the light is going to catch on top. So we're building that texture, building that tone, and building that character and illusion through each brush stroke. Now from there, I'm going to use a Purity White from Scale 75, but you could use a multiple different range of different whites. Dead White from Vallejo is also a really good one. You could use just plain white from AK Interactive, that would also be a good one. But I wanted to use a mixture of my different paints, so I'm using Purity White here from Scale 75. And again, I'm just going to build up all of those little scraping brush strokes to create that illusion of fur, doing exactly the same thing as what we've done for the last two layers, but this time just using more of an extreme highlight. It's always good to go up in multiple stages and in layers. I tend to find sort of 3 layers is enough for my painting style. You can go multiple layers, you can go further, you can push yourself 5, 6, 7 layers if you want. That's completely up to you. But myself, I find 3 layers tends to be quite good. You know, a base, a mid-tone, a highlight, maybe an extra highlight. It's always sort of a nice sort of roundish kind of number, kind of gets the effect that you're looking for. So once we've done all of the hair, I'm going to move on to Squid Pink. Now with this, I'm adding a very small amount of Squid Pink, and I've added a lot of water to this. As you can see by me just using it on my hand here, it is now more like a glaze. So by using this as a much thinner layer, as you can see, it's barely touching the model. And I'm just going to paint this around the nose of the horse and just the bottom lip here as well. Now what I've done with this is I've used 2 layers just to create the vibrancy that I wanted, but by making this into a glaze, a very thin paint, this means you can manipulate this onto the model and it's not going to take over the model. It's just going to give a very subtle hint of the colour. From there as well, I'm just going to add a little bit of soft tone, which is a very light brown wash, and I'm just going to do that just quickly around the hooves as well, just to kind of add a little bit of tone and texture to them so that we can see that they aren't just one flat colour. And then we're going to move on to the horse's hair. So we're going to paint the mane and the tail, and we're going to start off with the bone white colour, just like so. And we're going to do the same thing as what we've done with Theoden's hair, and we're just going to paint this by hand with all of those different strands, and we're going to paint those as neatly as possible. And again, that light grey wash now is doing a lot more work than you'd think. So originally it looks like the light grey wash hasn't done much, but actually when you start to build these colours and textures back up, you realise just how much that light grey is just kind of sitting in those pooled areas and just creating a subtle tone of definition. It's just creating that subtle depth and that subtle sort of shadowing without the need of a darker colour or a black colour. From there, after using the bone white, we're going to use Elfic Flesh. This is a great light cream colour as well, so this is a creamy white colour, which is a perfect highlight to bone white, something that I use quite often whenever I use bone white. This is a great colour to go above, and again we're just going to pick out all of those individual strands. I'm also doing this to the mane as well of the horse, but it is quite difficult to show on camera, so I'm just going to show you the tail because this is easier to follow. And as you see, again using that sort of sketching motion with the paintbrush, I'm just going to paint this texture just on top, and there we go. We can start to see now that this colour, this vibrancy is really starting to boost through the hairs of the tail here, and it's really subtle, but it's just enough to catch your eye. It's just enough to make that model look like it's got that subtle depth, like there's more texture and tone and colour to it as well. It's a really cool subtle little technique to kind of get your lighter colours really popping and really showing through as well. After that, I'm going to move back onto the Purity White, and as I said earlier, you can use kind of a multitude of different whites. Just Purity White is my kind of colour of the day for this model, and again I'm just going to use this just across the very edge of those hairs and those textures. So all of those details now, I'm just picking out the very tip of the hair on the tail, and again, like I said, I'm also doing this across the mane, so don't forget the mane as well, because this is going to have the same colour and the same texture and the same intensity to it. It's a really cool technique and a very simple one to do as well. Again, should you want to, you could dry brush this. That's completely up to you. I won't tell you what's right or wrong. I'll just give you sort of a video of me painting and let you guys follow along if you want. You're always welcome to sort of chill out and paint with me at any time. So there we go, just showing you a little bit of the mane here, just trying to pick out the very edges of the mane now with the white. And as I say, it's kind of difficult to show you on camera because Theoden is holding his sword aloft, ready to slice down some orcs. So there we go, all in all, that is Theoden. He is all done. I really enjoyed painting this one. This was a really fun one again. The Middle-earth models are becoming such a big favourite of mine. You can see why. The detail, the character, bringing some of these iconic characters to life is such a rewarding and cool thing to do. You guys will have to let me know in the comments below what you think of my Theoden, and if it was easy to follow, if some of the techniques turned out great, if they weren't so great. So give me a shout. I always love hearing from you, and I always try my best to answer every comment that comes in. I really do appreciate it. As always, my friends, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for watching. Thank you for your positivity. Thank you for your kindness. Just thank you for being all-round awesome dudes. So yeah, thank you very much. So yeah, take care, my friends, and I will see you guys on the next one.